Councilmember Rouse.
Here.
Councilmember Hotchkiss.
Here.
And Councilmember Murillo.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, and I would invite any public comment for any items not on the agenda. And seeing no public to speak, we will continue on with the presentation. Mr. Bailey, please.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Derek Bailey. I'm with the city's Public Works Department in the Traffic Engineering Group. With me this afternoon is Sergeant Mike Brown from the Santa Barbara Police Department. The reason we're here today is to recommend to the Ordinance Committee forward to City Council some speed limit changes, updates to the municipal code. There are three distinct things that we're recommending today. The first one is an update to the speed zone schedule in the Santa Barbara Municipal Code. The second one is a change to the playground speed limit ordinance. And the third one is establishing a new school zone speed limit ordinance. So the first one I want to talk about is an update to the speed zone schedule in the Santa Barbara Municipal Code. On the right side of the screen, that's what it looks like in the municipal code. It's a list of all the streets in Santa Barbara that have speed zones, and you can see it's listed under, in this case, 45 miles an hour. There's a number of streets, 40 miles an hour, 35, etc. We have a total of 71 speed zones in Santa Barbara. Now, the California Vehicle Code, which is this lovely thick document here, it gives us instructions on how we have to set speed limits in California. If we don't abide by what the California Vehicle Code says as far as establishing speed limits, the speed limits aren't enforceable. So if we didn't obey this and we just decided 35 would be an appropriate speed for this street, but we didn't do the actual study and documentation, the police couldn't enforce that 35 mile an hour speed zone. So the way it works is all non-local streets in the state require an engineering and traffic survey. Now, when we do an engineering and traffic survey, the most important thing that we look at is the speeds that people are actually traveling. We actually have to go out and measure the speeds that people are traveling on a street. And the thing that we're looking for is what's called the 85th percentile speed. And so if we go out and we were to measure 100 vehicles and the speeds that those vehicles are traveling and then rank them from lowest to highest, it's number 85. That's the 85th percentile. We do have the flexibility to round up or down, like if the 85th percentile speed ends up being 32 miles an hour, we can round down to 30 or up to 35, whatever we feel is most appropriate. But that 85th percentile speed is really what we have to follow when we're establishing a speed limit in California. We talk about drivers voting with their gas pedals. It's really true. Whatever the majority of people are driving on a street and whatever they feel comfortable traveling, that's how we have to set the speed limit. So we often get calls from the public about, well, can't you just lower the speed limit on my street? People are going too fast. Fortunately, no. We do have to follow the procedures laid out in the California Vehicle Code when establishing speed limits.
Mr. Chair. So,
Question,
Mr. Bailey, I mean, we could lower the speed, but then we wouldn't be able to enforce it, and then we'd be open for legal challenge and those kinds of issues, right?
Councilmember Murillo, yes, thank you. Yes, if we were, like I said, if we were just to arbitrarily put up speed limit signs that we felt were good, but they didn't actually follow the procedure in the California Vehicle Code, the police couldn't enforce.
And since I have my mic on, can I ask you to describe non-local streets? That's a weird expression. When
Yes.
I read it, wait a minute, we're talking about local streets. What does that mean,
Yes,
Mr. Bailey?
and next slide, I'm going to show you what that is. Just before we go to that slide, we do have to update the engineering and traffic survey every 7 years. Normally, the speed limit that we find is the same, and there is no change, so it's not something that typically comes back to the Ordinance Committee or City Council for change. But when a speed limit does move up or down by whatever speed, then that is something we have to come back and have City Council approve in order to be put into the municipal code.
Mr. Hotchkiss.
Quick question. How do you do it's called ETS, is that right?
Yes, engineering and traffic survey.
Are you going to go into that, or should I ask that now?
Yeah, now's a good time to ask. Like I said, the most important thing that we do is we go do a speed survey We measure the speeds that vehicles are traveling. And from there, we do have the flexibility to round up or down. But other things that we consider in the engineering and traffic survey is the presence of pedestrians, bikes, the collision history, the configuration of the road. But that really only tells us whether or not we should round up or down to the nearest 5 mile an hour. It doesn't give us the flexibility to wholesale move the speed limit up or down by any significant amount.
Do you spend a day on a street observing, or?
What we typically do for measuring speeds is we lay the rubber tubes across the road, and sometimes we leave them out there for a day, sometimes a week, just depending on equipment availability. But we also, once we get the results from those road tubes, they give us like a automatic count of an entire time period. We'll go out with a LiDAR gun, just like the police use when they enforce, and we'll actually record typically 100 vehicles that go by, just to confirm the results that we're getting from the road tubes.
So those rubber tubes are set, I don't know, 100 feet apart or something?
No, they're typically set about 4 feet apart.
So how do you measure, because every car has a different axle setup?
Right. But typically what happens is the front tires hit the first tube, and then the front tires will hit the second tube, and it's the amount of time that it takes to get from one to the other. And
Okay.
the machine that the rubber tubes are hooked up to is that precise that it can actually tell the amount of time that it takes to travel just 4 feet.
Okay,
at
that
higher
makes
speeds.
sense. I understand. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, on to local streets. So this is a map of Santa Barbara, and this is what we call the functional roadway classification map. It's a map maintained by Caltrans for the Federal Highway Administration. And what it is it tells what each street in Santa Barbara is classified as. Every city and region in California has a map like this. We classify our roads into typically 3 sections. There's local streets, and that's like the lowest class of street. That's like typically residential streets, streets that don't connect very far. They're not through streets. The medium classification is what's called a collector street, and the purpose of a collector street is kind of from people to feed from the local streets into a collector street to travel kind of a medium distance. And then we have our arterial streets. And the purpose of arterial streets is kind of more high-speed, longer range trips in the city. So examples of local streets in Santa Barbara, a lot of the streets up on the Mesa would be local streets. A lot of streets up in like San Roque area would be local streets. Collector-type streets are like Bath and Castillo. They're made for going kind of a medium distance. Arterial streets would be like an outer state street, Cliff Drive, Cabrillo. They're meant to carry higher volumes of traffic, longer distances. So when you look at this map, everything that's in color is either a collector street or an arterial street. All the grayed out streets in the background are local streets. So all those grayed out streets in the background, they're 25 automatically. That's what the California Vehicle Code says. Everything that's in color, and you can see just about the entire downtown grid is in color, requires an engineering and traffic survey in order to have the speed limit enforceable. I mentioned we have 71 speed zones in the city. There's a lot more than 71 streets up there, and they are really time-consuming to do. So we don't have speed zones on each and every street in Santa Barbara, but we don't necessarily need them. An example would be like Ortega Street as it goes through downtown. There's a traffic signal or a stop sign at every block as you go along Ortega from the freeway all the way out to the east side. So there's not really the ability to get going really fast there. So that is one street that we don't have a speed zone on. But a lot of other streets in town we do. All the major ones, Carrillo, Outer State Street, 71 times.
So, Mr. Bailey, an example of, thinking of an intersection we talked about a lot was De La Vina and Figueroa. And De La Vina is a collector street, is that correct?
De La Vina is an arterial street.
An arterial street.
Yep, a minor arterial.
And one of the issues about putting a signal or anything more like a bona fide crosswalk there was that there was an upstream traffic signal and a downstream traffic signal at each intersection. But would the category of street determine how often you could put in a light or a stop or a painted crosswalk? Would that have any determination at all on that?
No, there is a relationship, but it's not the determining factor. Typically, when you're talking about what the most appropriate type of traffic control is, it has a lot to do with the traffic volumes and the speeds. That's not dictated by the roadway classification, but there's definitely a relationship. Arterial streets tend to carry more traffic. Local streets carry a lot less traffic. So, although we can't say we'll put a signal here because it's an arterial street, we would probably say something. We would put a signal here because of the high traffic volumes, which go along with an arterial street. Okay, so the proposed updates to the speed limit schedule in the Santa Barbara Municipal Code, we're recommending 4 new entries, 2 on Cliff Drive and 2 on Las Positas. This is related to the State Route 225 relinquishment. The speed limits, the speed surveys that we did matched what Caltrans had found. So a lot of questions we've received about Cliff Drive in particular is, can you lower the speed limit on Cliff Drive? It's 40 miles an hour for most of the distance on Cliff Drive from the City College area almost out to Las Positas. And the answer is no. Based on the speed data that we collected on what people are driving along Cliff Drive, 40 miles an hour is the most appropriate speed limit for that street. Another question we have is Las Positas, 55 miles an hour. Is that a good speed limit? It seems awfully fast. But again, we did the data collection and how fast people are actually traveling on Las Positas, and that 85th percentile speed is 54 point something miles an hour. So 55 miles an hour is the right speed limit for Las Positas Road. So the speed limits that we're recommending be entered into the municipal code match what Caltrans had along that corridor. We do have 3 speed limit decreases that we're recommending be entered into the municipal code on Bath Street and Castillo Street. This is the small sections of Bath and Castillo north of Mission, like in between Mission and Cottage Hospital. Currently 30 miles an hour. We're recommending that go down to 25 miles an hour, again, based on the speeds that we measured in the neighborhood. As well, Calle Real, between the Oak Park neighborhood and Las Positas. It's currently, I believe, 40 miles an hour, and we're recommending it go down to my cheat sheet, 30. So from 40 down to 30. So we have seen quite a decrease in the speeds that people are actually driving on Calle Real along that section.
Could that be because there's a whole bunch of stop signs? You never have a chance to really accelerate up to whatever the given speed limit is?
It does play a factor. You know, when we do our speed measurements, we have to choose a location that's as free flow as possible. We can't go 100 feet from a stop sign and measure the speeds right there. So we are looking at something kind of midway between where the stop signs are next to Oak Park and Las Positas, something where the traffic is more free flow. But like you said, the traffic control can definitely impact what drivers are driving.
And those are pretty congested streets, so my anecdotal experience is you just naturally slow down because people are getting in and out of parked cars, stopping at stop signs, et cetera. So I'm not surprised that it's reduced here. Thank you.
And we are recommending 1 speed limit increase on Cabrillo Boulevard, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. It's next to Chase Palm Park. There's also a lot of cleanup that we're recommending in the speed limit schedule. Just an example of that is Milpas Street. Currently, Milpas Street, as it's entered in the municipal code, has a speed limit of 30 miles an hour between Anapamu down to Mason Street. That section between Mason Street and Cabrillo Boulevard doesn't have a speed limit. And I suspect this is an old leftover from when State Route 144 used to go up Milpas, across Mason, and then up Sycamore Canyon Road. And Caltrans did relinquish most of that to the city. But that's what we have in the municipal code right now. So what we are recommending is just cleaning that up and making it a consistent 30 miles an hour from top to bottom. And there's a couple like this in the municipal code that's just adjusting the endpoints just because it doesn't reflect our modern street system. Another recommendation is to change the street names because some of the street names have changed in the city. For example, Yananali Street is entered from Garden to Salsa Puedes. Salsa Puedes is now known as Calle Cesar Chavez. So no change to the speed, but the end point needs to be redefined. So it's just housekeeping, cleanup. And so that's a summary of the speed limit changes that we're recommending into the speed zone schedule in the municipal code. The second thing that we are recommending is to do with playground speed zoning. California Vehicle Code allows local agencies to establish 25-mile-an-hour speed zones adjacent to children's playgrounds. And in Santa Barbara, we currently have two of these. One's on Cabrillo Boulevard next to Chase Palm Park, and the other is on Shoreline Drive next to Shoreline Park. We're recommending that you delegate the authority to establish these speed zones to the Public Works Department. The reason for that is that we work closely with the police department in identifying enforcement challenges and as well speed limits that aren't quite working or having the effect that they're supposed to have. And so by delegating the authority to us, we'd be more quickly able to implement and respond to the police department and their needs to do enforcement. The things we are going to recommend changing is removing the Cabrillo Boulevard speed zone. There's currently 25 miles an hour, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. As well, we'd like to lengthen the Shoreline Park playground speed limit zone. So currently on Cabrillo, these are the speed limits that are in place. And again, this is likely left over from many years ago when this used to be State Route 225, many years ago. The only speed limits established in the municipal code is a 35-mile-an-hour speed zone out near the bird refuge. And as well, there's a 25-mile-an-hour playground speed limit zone in between Garden and Calle Cesar Chavez. That 25-mile-an-hour zone is widely disregarded, looking for the right choice of words. Based on the study that we've done, most drivers are driving in the low to mid 30s. And what's happening is you'll get one driver that's obeying that 25 mile an hour speed limit zone strictly, and you'll get 8 to 10 drivers that are driving in the 30s. And speed differential is actually a safety concern as well, because a slow-moving driver can catch the majority of drivers off guard, and sometimes they can make maneuvers or reactions that the rest just aren't anticipating. As far as the configuration of this road, it's an arterial street. The access on either side, on the north side, the park is fenced off, except for a pedestrian crossing midway, which is signalized. The south side of the road has a really wide sidewalk, a parking aisle as a buffer. So we're recommending that 25 mile an hour speed zone for associated with the playground be removed and be established with a full-time 30 mile an hour speed zone. So this is what we're recommending for the entire corridor. 35 miles an hour from Calle Cesar Chavez all the way out past the bird refuge to Highway 101, and then 30 miles an hour past Chase Palm Park and then through the West Beach area over to Castillo.
All right. Council members, if I can just interject 1 second. In regards to the speed limit of 25 miles per hour in roads adjacent to a school playground, it was an open question originally because the Vehicle Code section 22357.1 talks about through ordinance resolution, a local authority can set that speed limit of 25 miles per hour any street adjacent to a children's playground in a public park. So based on that, we're asking for ministerial authority of any road that just meets that particular qualification to be allowed to have that speed limit, not just, so it has to meet those specific requirements, those roads. answer any questions.
Mr. Rose, would you identify yourself for the public? For
Oh,
the
sure,
record,
absolutely. I apologize. John Doymus from the Santa Barbara City Attorney's Office.
Chair Rouse, let me amplify on that a little bit. The vehicle code is not explicit that you can delegate to your staff the authority to set speed limits. So what Mr. Doymus is saying is that the delegation would confine the discretion of your staff within a narrow band, and we feel like that's more defensible.
That's much better. Thank you.
May I ask a question, Mr. Chair? So there is a playground function there, and so we have to make a decision that it's okay to go to 30? Is that what you're saying?
No. In terms of if it's if there's any land or any road adjacent to a children's playground in a public park, that the speed limit be 25 miles per hour, just for that zone, that location. That's all.
Okay, but we want to change it from 25 to 30.
In this case,
Yes.
yes. But the prima facie limit of 25, yes. That's the.
Because most people go that speed anyway, right? That's what you're saying, Mr. Bailey? Thank you.
Correct. Councilmember Murillo, the speed limit is 25 mile an hour speed limit is ineffective. People just aren't driving 25 miles an hour. So it's much more reasonable, knowing what we know about what people are actually driving, to set that speed limit so we're not making speeders out of most of the public who are driving what they perceive as a reasonable speed for that section of roadway.
May I ask, too, if it's odd that it's going to be 30 miles per hour in one section and then 35 in the same road, just in another section of it? How often does that happen?
Councilmember Murillo, this is actually quite common.
Okay.
What you typically have near more dense and busier commercial areas is a lower speed limit. So in this case, we have 30 miles an hour going through the West Beach area. There's a lot more going on down there, a lot more foot traffic, bicycles, more adjacent land uses that generate pedestrian traffic. And as we move out into less dense areas,
Right.
then the speed limit increases. So this is actually quite common. In Santa Barbara, just with the layout of our city, we don't have a lot of this, but the general layout of most cities is from downtown, you have more dense, congested streets, and as you move out into less dense areas, you have higher speed limits.
Thanks.
Mr. Hotchkiss.
And I think what you're saying is people naturally respond to congestion and slow down now when they get approaching from like Garden and State and all that. Plus the road bends a little bit.
Yep.
And you got buses on the side, et cetera. And the increase near the playground would be unwarranted if it weren't fenced, but it's completely fenced off. It's totally protected.
Councilmember Hotchkiss, yes. My understanding of the original intent when this playground speed limit was established, it did happen at the time that the North Side Park and Playground were built, and there was concerns about people going fast along Cabrillo Boulevard next to this new park, but the safety issues never did materialize just because of the fenced-off access from the north side. There just isn't the people wandering across mid-block or anything like that. It just didn't materialize. And instead, all the crossings are focused to the mid-block where there is a traffic signal, the safest place to cross.
For more clearly for me, Mr. Bailey, right now it's marked as a short section because it's higher prior to it, 25, and then higher afterwards. So I think that's probably part of the problem you're talking about was, traffic being slow and occluding other cars that are going faster. Is that part of the deal? Okay. And I could have sworn wasn't the point between Ninos and the Highway 101 wasn't that 40 at one point in time?
Councilmember Rouse, it may have been. I'm not sure, and there may even
Shows you how much I've been
there may
paying
even
attention.
be a leftover sign out there, but we will clean all that up and have more frequently placed signs. That's one thing along Cabrillo Boulevard right now is there's not a nice even spacing to our speed limit signs. So as part of this effort, we'll be cleaning all that up.
Probably shouldn't mention my ignorance in front of the sergeant there, but, and then of course, right, with the bridge project, nobody's going 30 miles an hour for another couple of years anyway, so we don't know that.
No, you're lucky to do half that. And
That's like slalom
Yeah.
further
Yeah.
now.
All right, thank you.
So the other park that we are recommending a change around is around Shoreline Park. So currently there's a 35 mile an hour speed zone, Castillo Street, past City College, and then up the hill, ending at La Marina. There's a 25, and I'm sorry the colors didn't show up as well on the big screen as they do on our small monitors. So 35 miles an hour past City College, up the hill to La Marina. This is adjacent to Shoreline Park right here is the 25 mile an hour playground zone. And then it's 30 miles an hour as it continues west along Shoreline until Shoreline turns into Meigs at Salida del Sol. What we are recommending is to extend that 25 mile an hour zone down the hill adjacent to Ledbetter Beach to Loma Alta. So there'd be a 35 mile an hour zone adjacent to City College, 25 up the hill adjacent to Ledbetter and Shoreline, and then 30 miles an hour continuing west through the neighborhood. The third thing, and this is something new in the California Vehicle Code that cities are allowed to do, school zone speed limit zoning. Currently, within 500 feet of a school ground, the speed limit is 25 miles an hour by default. There's no speed survey or anything that's needed for that. As long as a school zone warning sign is in place, 25 miles an hour is the speed limit when children are present. So it's only when children are present. What's new in the California Vehicle Code is that local agencies can extend that speed zone up to 1,000 feet with a local ordinance. So currently it's 500 feet, and if the City Council approves an ordinance, we can extend that up to 1,000 feet. We're recommending you delegate that authority to the Public Works Department. We work closely with the Police Department. They get a lot of complaints from concerned parents and residents about speeds around schools, and this is to be more responsive to those residents' concerns. The three specific zones that we are planning to implement, and again, this is working with the police department, is on Laguna Street, next just south of Roosevelt School. Currently, it's 500 feet. We would be recommending increasing that to 1,000 feet. On Anacapa Street, that's Notre Dame School. Again, currently 500 feet. We're recommending that would go up to 1,000 feet. And on Flora Vista, that's Monroe School. So currently, again, it's 500 feet, and we'd recommend extending that zone up to 1,000 feet. It is only when children are present.
Mr. Hodges has a question?
Yeah. So on Anacapa and Laguna, is that typically meaning going from one block to two blocks?
Yes. Yeah, blocks in our downtown area are just over 500 feet long, so it would be 1 block to 2 blocks.
To play devil's advocate, which I would not disagree with this, but I sometimes think that people, when they see they're getting near a school, they slow down. And if now they're not seeing they're getting near a school and they're supposed to slow down, is that going to be a problem for us or for the cops, you think? Do you know what I mean?
I do, Councilmember Hotchkiss. You know, the reason we're recommending this is because in these areas there are typically children crossing the street further away from school. You know, we encourage people to cross right near schools. It's typically the highest awareness of drivers, but in reality what's happening is some of these crossings are taking place a little bit further away from schools. So I understand what you're saying about being further away and drivers losing their awareness, but it's really to increase their awareness further away from the school. We will have a series of signs, standard signs that we have to implement in order to establish a 25 mile an hour zone leading up to a school. So we think drivers will respond to that.
And do we measure if we're being effective after we do this? Is there any way to do that? In other words, Is it working, or did we do something foolish?
Right. It is a little awkward to measure because it's not something we can automatically measure. Like, we can't put the road tubes out because when we put road tubes out, we can't tell if there's children present or not. So it's actually something we would have to manually do. We work closely with the police department, and they're the eyes and ears. They know quite well what how traffic is behaving and how drivers are responding. So we could do a study, but typically we rely on the police department to tell us whether or not it's being effective and if there's anything more they'd like us to do.
Just parenthetically, one of the problems on Laguna is because it's a downhill street and you're coming out of the Upper Riviera, for bike riders who hate to stop at stop signs because it's stop and go, et cetera, they could literally fly down Laguna sometimes. I don't know how we handle that, but since you don't hear a bike coming, and if you're a little kid, you may not even be looking, that can be a pretty dangerous situation. Am I throwing too many variables at you here?
It is another variable. I'm not really sure how to respond. The bicycle enforcement issue is a particularly challenging one.
And I'm just pointing out that it will be there, that street, I think, because it is going downhill and you can get great speed up and you don't want to stop if you're a rider. All right, be forewarned, I guess, is the word.
And then, Mr. Bailey, when children are present, is a little squishy in terms of what people think of as normal school hours, what they don't. Are children present when they're in fact in class? Is it the entire school day? Is it after school programs? How does that work in terms of the vehicle code, or is that part of the vehicle code?
Councilmember Rouse, it is part of the vehicle code. And what when children present means is school-age children, so K through 12 is what's defined as a student. So it's not preschool, it's not Santa Barbara City College students, it's like elementary, junior high, and high school, and it is during normal school hours. Our signs, we can't get signs too wordy or drivers can't see them. So it'd be an awfully long message to have when children between 5 and 17, between September and June, type thing. So drivers are expected to know the law and understand that when children are present, mean school children during school hours.
Thank you.
And that is the end of my presentation.
Okay, very good. I apparently have one public speaker comment. Okay, Susan Horn, would you please come up to the podium? And you have 2 minutes. There's a timer visible on your...
Okay. Thank you. Sorry I came a little late to do it beforehand, but anytime you talk about increasing the speed limit, it just strikes fear to my heart and to most people that experience too fast speeds. But the data shows that the faster a car is going when it hits someone, the damage to the person, the injury severity is increased exponentially. So we're kind of saying when we're raising the speed limit, if you just look at the speed limit, not at all the other variables about intersections and all that, but just the speed limit, you're basically asking when you increase it for more severe injuries and maybe more deaths. So, to put it starkly, so anyway, I just feel like someone needs to say that and ask you in the general public, everybody that I talk to that lives in my neighborhoods keeps wanting to lower the speed limit on Cliff Drive, for example, and because they see the dangers to crossing into the kids. Anyway.
Thank you. Mr. Hotchkiss has a question for you, Ms.
Quick
Horn.
question for you. Having heard Mr. Bailey's explanation, can you tell your friends when you talk now the reason that the speeds at Cliff Drive are what they are?
Yes, it's kind of a complicated thing for people to understand. In a sentence, you can't get it out. You know, it takes a number of sentences to describe that. And it's not a quick soundbite, and that's what I'm saying. And people don't want to hear it, and it's kind of hard to understand the first time you hear it. And yes, whenever I get a chance, I bring that up. But that's not, I don't usually have a chance to, because I hear it in public meetings and, you know, in passing and in the Mesa newspaper and, you know, letters to the editor, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I do understand the reasons, but it really, and they have changed. New York City, you know, with Vision Zero activities in the last year, in this last year, they've changed all the city to 25 miles per hour. And they have really reduced their injuries and deaths.
But you understand why it's not possible here.
Well, I don't know what their state law is, you know.
Okay,
It's probably different than
yeah.
ours.
Well, New York is different anyway, right? Thank you.
Then Mr. Bailey has gone to and continues to go to a number of public neighborhood meetings because that question gets asked all the time. Certainly, we did the work on Milpas, which was Mr. Bailey's Welcome to Santa Barbara moment. And I don't know if you go to the Mesa, we had a Mesa kind of a get-together, and that was very, very okay, thank you. All right, it's to the committee for discussion. We are tasked with forwarding this information and recommendation to council. Any comments from the committee? Ms. Murillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We didn't hear from our police officer. Did you have anything to say? Obviously, you support these changes. And if I'm correct, to satisfy Ms. Horn, the only speed limit increase that we're discussing today is on Cabrillo Boulevard. Is that correct? And
That's correct.
And then in terms of Cliff Drive, the ordinance changes that we're making will facilitate, allow more and better enforcement?
Yes, it'll allow the police department to enforce the speed limit in those areas.
On Cliff Drive.
Excuse me, Sergeant, would you identify yourself for the public, please?
I'm Sergeant Mike Brown, Santa Barbara Police Department.
Thank you, Sergeant. Did you want to add any other general comment? There was a lot of things going on here, the school zones. I mean, I know I slow down when I'm approaching a school. Maybe other people don't.
That is absolutely correct. Other people don't.
Okay.
And we're saying the reason we're asking it to be extended is to try to get them slowed down prior to reaching the school. Right now, you brought up the Anacapa. Right now, we're getting complaints of cars just flying through the school zone. So I sent an officer over there to monitor it, and we were catching people going through 40 mile an hour. And it's the school zone right now at 500 feet is a very short distance. Mm-hmm. So we're not catching them until they're at the school area. If we can extend that distance, we can slow them down a lot sooner than right at the school area. So that's the reason we're asking it to be extended. It just makes it safer for everybody around.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I still had. So I'm ready to make a motion to go forward. The only statement that I would add is that I'm sorry there weren't more public here, because when I talk to my constituents, now they want to talk a little bit about the DSAL, and sometimes they want to talk about street people on State Street, but everybody wants to talk about traffic and speeding in their neighborhoods. So I'm like, you didn't get a really huge audience here, and really this is huge to a lot of people. This is what they want to talk to me about. So maybe the new district elections configuration would bring this topic down to the neighborhood levels. I'm not sure. We're all wondering how that's going to go, right, in the future. I'm glad it's replaying on television, and that it's a really important discussion about when street signs go in and speed limits and stuff. So, but may I move staff recommendation just to get the ball rolling? Thank you.
Thank you. We got a motion. Mr. Hodges?
Second.
Very good. And then a quick question for Sergeant Brown, because the Shoreline Drive, is my neighborhood. And I find that those automatic speed signs to be rather effective in getting people to change. Not always, but they seem. Do you find that as well in your estimation?
Yes, it does have an effect on the overall traffic flow, definitely. When you see a sign flashing how fast you're going, it does have an effect on it.
Right. I don't know what the cost or logistics are behind putting those in, but I would think, particularly around school zones, I think that would be effective, but it's just me.
Councilmember Rouse, could I
Yes,
add to that?
Mr. Bailey.
The signs are typally $8,000 to $10,000 each. That's the cost.
Okay,
Yes.
8 to 10,000.
8 to 10,000 each. By the time you put in a foundation and a pole, and whether it's solar or have a hardwired electrical service, I know they're very expensive, and they are very effective at first. And they're very effective the first time drivers encounter them. Some drivers that drive the same route each and every day, as some of the off-beaten streets in Santa Barbara, not the more touristy ones, that have normal commuting patterns, they lose their effectiveness over time. People get used to them. And so for us, as far as a long-term solution to speeding, it doesn't seem to be $8,000 to $10,000 extremely well spent, just because the effectiveness tends to last about 2 years. It's always effective on new drivers for the first time they're going by them. But what we've found and what other cities have found is they do lose their effectiveness over time to people that see them every day.
Mr. Hotchkiss.
Would that warrant then the portable ones that you see around, so you leave them there for a week or two and then move to another part of the city, much less expensive that way?
Councilmember Hotchkiss, yes, we do have one trailer. We have, and we do place it around town, and the trailer has a little pop-up display. It runs on solar power, and it displays the speed of people that drive by. It is very effective when it's out. We've done studies, and the next day speeds are right back to normal. So they're not a long-term solution either, and they are time-consuming to put out in the morning and take in the evening.
No silver bullet here, but let's move forward. I agree with Ms. Murillo.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And passes unanimously. Thank you.
I'd like to ask for a follow-up direction as well, and that is to calm my continued nervousness about delegating authority to the Public Works Director to designate the zones adjacent to schools and children's playgrounds. So if we could have a motion to direct my office to confirm that authority in sections 10.20.020 and 10.20.040, I'd appreciate it. What's happening, what I want to make sure the committee understands is that traditionally the council has set those speed limits by ordinance or resolution. What's being proposed, and I don't have any opposition to it, what's being proposed is that you would delegate that authority to the Public Works Department to set those speed limits around school zones and children's playgrounds. I want to be absolutely positive before we do that there is legal authority that allows that kind of delegation.
And in that
I'm
scenario,
not sure of that right now.
in that scenario, Mr. Colon, would there be a public hearing regarding any change in speed limits?
Well, I think not. I think that the delegation is designed, as Mr. Bailey said, to allow faster, more responsive service to the communities when a speed zone issue comes up. And we have reason to believe that happens in other cities, but I haven't confirmed through the vehicle code that that's indeed lawful, and I'd like to do that.
Well, I agree it would be responsive, and I also believe that it probably results more often than not in reduced speed limits, but I also believe there would be public concern over input or neighborhood input. I don't know how to approach that.
Well, I think that if you give the direction I'm asking for, we can address it before the full council and
All right.
make sure that's clear then.
Ms. Murillo.
I'd like to follow Mr. Kalan's advice, and I move that suggestion.
Okay, moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, passed unanimously as well. Thank you. And this committee's adjourned. Thank you.